Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and non-binary authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly Quick Read series. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout that we'll be providing in the chat and by visiting our website. This link will also appear in your chat, strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those who have made a tip jar donation. We really appreciate that very much. I'm your host today, Elaine Isaak, and you can find out more about me in the provided handout as well. Please note that recording of the session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal. Today, we'll be featuring 6 authors: Dianna Gunn, Liza Wemakor, Kelli Owen, J.E. Hannaford, V Melcer, and Jessica Turnbull. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader today is Dianna Gunn. Dianna Gunn writes fantasy, horror, and occasionally science fiction about strong women overcoming trauma. Her work has appeared in the Nothing Without Us 2 and Broken Olive Branches anthologies. Her first dark fantasy series, The Moonshadow Rising duology, is available now. Dianna, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, and I will be reading from Chapter 7 of Moonshadow's Guardian. This is the first chapter in the perspective of the secondary viewpoint character, and we will be starting with a flashback. Several months after the city of Rhaenyra's death, a half-starved boy from the southernmost reaches of Shalinor stumbled into my city. He was covered in filth from weeks on the road, his clothes torn almost to nothing. Still, when I saw him collapse by the river, my heart soared. His was the first life I had seen in months, perhaps the only life left in Shalinor other than my own. I went to his side and forced water down his swollen throat. I carried him back to the palace. He weighed little, much less than a boy his age should. I put him in the bedchamber closest to my own and nursed him back to health. He woke 3 days after I found him and told me his story, his sentences punctuated with whimpers as I ran a wet cloth along his still feverish forehead. He was Galvin, the only surviving member of his family. He had walked all the way to Rhaenyra to see if the rumors were true, if the city still stood. He told me he wanted to die on our land, tell our land, rather than follow the others into hostile kingdoms. I've seen it, he wheezed. It's as beautiful as they said. I can die happy now. You will not die yet, I said. But I am already dead. I never knew if he meant on the outside or inside as he slipped back into unconsciousness. I healed him anyway, helped him regain his strength, taught him everything I knew. Each day with him was a joy, even if the world was gray and gloomy around us. He was the son I never got to raise. Galvin soon grew into a man, and with the aid of my magic, he lived to be an old man, but I could not keep him forever. Over time, he grew old and weak, and one day he asked me to take him outside. I did, carrying him as I had when I first found him. He was bony again, almost weightless. I took him to the river that was now only a creek, and there we sat under a long-dead tree, enjoying each other's silent company. You know, he said, I came here to die all those years ago. Yes, I said, refusing to look at him. I couldn't stand his gaunt face, the red blotches on his skin, marks of the disease my spells could not defeat. You saved me. I wanted to thank you. Don't thank me, I said. I've been grateful to have you, and selfish. Selfish? You gave me everything. I shook my head. You've never known a lover, a family, a community, only this dead city and my sad old soul. A hand touched mine and I met his gaze, my soul aching as I saw the warmth in his deep brown eyes, the mark of how much he loved me. That is more than I dreamed of finding when I came here. All I wanted was to see the great city before I died. He shifted, grimacing as if the movement hurt him. Of course it did. They all did, the movements of these old bones. Now, my only hope is that you won't spend the rest of eternity alone. I squeezed his hand. I chose my path, but if there is a way to bring my people home, I will find it. A shudder ran through him, sending a tremor along my arm. You will stop the death, then. I will. I said. Our queendom will someday rise again. I didn't believe the words then, but Galvin did. He smiled and lay back in the grass, staring into the endless expanse of clouds. I wish I could see it, he sighed. The queendom of Shalinor raised from the ashes by its greatest hero, Kari. Perhaps you will in another life. I didn't know if I believed in reincarnation then, but I wanted to. To believe Galvin and all my people would someday know a better life. Tell me, he whispered, what our new queendom will look like. First of all, I began, picking at a clump of grey dirt, it will be green. Plants will grow in every free space. They'll even grow in the cracks between cobblestones. Keeping the plants at bay will be a constant struggle, but the city will be covered in colors all year round. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, imagining the streets of Remanera once again flooded with life, their sounds and smells filling the air. The sun will shine on it often, but not enough to create drought, and people from all over Wemakor will come to see it, and when they are here, they will be kind to our people. It sounds perfect, I smiled. It does, doesn't it? And so a dream was born. 500 years later, a whisper on the wind caught my attention, the orb calling my name. It was time. An ancient voice, one more familiar than my own after all these years alone, curled outward from the orb, filling my mind. Hello, my child. I know what you are here for. Then let us create it together. The words were ancient words, words of power. They tore my throat on the way out, but I didn't care. It would heal in the morning. With my hands, I shaped a person in the air. On the other side of the orb, a shadow appeared. First it was a blob, then it became half a man, growing arms and hands, then a full man with legs and feet. I closed my eyes and focused my power, filling the shadow with life, the soul of a real, living man. A human sound came from the bottom of the tower, crying, perhaps screaming, broke my concentration. I barreled down the stairs, not even letting myself breathe. For the first time in centuries, prayers ran through my head, prayers for life and abundance and success. I reached the bottom of the stairwell where the sound was coming from and threw open the tower door. There, sitting against a wall with his head in his hands, was a naked brown boy, perhaps 4 years old, his head covered with thick, curly hair and his body racked with sobs. He met my eyes and fell quiet. I stared at him in wonder. I had created life. The gods still smiled upon me, despite my curse. I fell to my knees and wept. The boy jumped into my arms and I wrapped them slowly around him, half expecting my hands to go through him, expecting him to be an illusion manifested by hope. His skin was soft like silk and his hair smelled like straw. He was entirely real and I had created him. My womb had been barren for centuries, but it didn't matter now. I had not only created life, I had also done what everyone who has ever lost someone dreams about. I had brought back somebody I loved. The boy tightened his arms around me and we wept together. And that is Moonshadow's Guardian. The book is currently on sale for 99 cents everywhere ebooks are sold, as is the second book, Moonshadow's Champion, or you can sign up to potentially win the ebook copy of Moonshadow's Guardian that I will be giving away to someone from this reading.
Thank you very much, Dianna. That was a fascinating reading. You got some great reactions going on there. We really appreciate that. In a minute, I'm going to post the link for that giveaway form. So when you fill out the survey, that's how you can get entered to win, or you may want to take advantage of the sale right now and grab both of those books. They sound marvelous. All right, I'd like to introduce our second reader. Our second reader today is Liza Wemakor. Liza Wemakor is a writer and a PhD student at UC Riverside's English department. She writes and studies speculative fiction and Black American literature. Her fiction is published and or forthcoming in Strange Horizons, Anathema Magazine, Baffling Magazine, Prismatica Magazine, and elsewhere. Her debut novel, Loving Sephoa, was published in February 2024. Liza, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Yep, so I will be reading also a flashback from Loving Sephoa, the novella that's on the screen to the left. So this is about halfway through the novella. It's chapter 5 of, I think, chapter 7. And we see Sephoa, who is the initial vampire character, escaping from a, let's say, difficult situation. August 1803, Accra, West Africa. Safwa. The medicine woman's house was exactly where Kwame said it would be, but I wouldn't have seen it if I wasn't looking for it, obscured as it is by brush and tree trunks. I tore the hem of my, Lisa's, dress on the spindly brush as I strode to her door. I knocked, waited a minute, and knocked louder, looking over my shoulder to ensure I hadn't been followed. I held my ear to the tanned wooden door, listening for the susurrus of feet. When there was no sound, I sat in a shrouded corner near her door, clinging to this safe space until she answered. I rested my head against my knees to pass the time and ended up losing track of it. A stick poking me in my side brought me back to reality, and daylight had fully set in. Thinking it might be a snake, I jumped up, but found myself facing a finely wrinkled woman in a kente-wrapped dress, holding a woven basket. Her hair was cut low to her scalp, and there were stretched holes in her earlobes where jewels would normally be. Her eyes were so deep set that they cast shadows on the perimeters of her sockets. "So they've brought me another one," she said in a rough drawl, sizing me up. She lifted my chin with her thumb and peered into my eyes, the depth of her gaze unsettling me. "But I see you've already had a drink," she observed with a hint of amusement. "That will make our first days together easier." She kicked open her door, set her basket on the floor, and looked back at me expectantly. "Do you want the white man to find you?" she asked. Without another word, I followed her inside. September 1803. My work with Mami Hunu resembled my duties with the Rose, and at first I resented her for it. Sweeping, cooking, gardening, fetching dried herbs and animal remains for her apothecary. For my suffering, I thought I deserved work of greater dignity. Mami was quick to remind me of my fortune in being alive, and the service she was providing by helping me to survive as a baby vampire. Grimacing at the end of her remarks, she snipped, "Me am someone too. If you ever have a newborn charge, you'll see it's no gameo." She looked me up and down as she kissed her teeth, and I bowed my head in shame. I didn't complain to her ever again. I didn't like this feeling of being sour, of having nothing to look forward to, that had overtaken me since I lived with the Rose. The ill feelings went nowhere, and certainly did nothing for my newborn restlessness. Edward held girls against their will, and my own first drink had been stolen from Lisa, after all. I imagined a long, troubling life of cornering victims in hospitals, bathrooms, and alleyways, apologizing as I took blood that would never be given to me willingly. I waited too long to drink, afraid of my own tongue, afraid that I wouldn't be able to control myself, that I would leave people scarred and depleted. I still believed vampires could only exist by force. Mami Hunu, who I began to call Manu, introduced me to her blood donors a few days into my stay with her, when I was wilting from hunger. Amma Green, the first donor I drank from, relieved my fears of inheriting Edward's brute force, but still made me fearful of the influence I had over people. She came to our cabin and smiled at me, lifting the back of her shea-buttered hand to my lips. I took her blood gently, and she was pleased by my tongue, for which Ma teased me mercilessly. But I wasn't prepared for how Amma and other donors would respond to my serum. The enrapturement on Amma's face was bold and bright whenever I drew from the basilic vein on her wrist. She was reluctant for me to stop, as if she would have allowed me to suck her dry in exchange for the euphoria. She began showing up to the house unannounced, and Ma and I had to chase her away for her own good. I didn't need that much blood, and I didn't want to take the risk of turning her. Even if she wanted to be turned, it was too dangerous. Her thirst for blood could be as unhinged as her thirst for serum. When Amma Green abruptly stopped showing up at our cabin, at first Ma and I were relieved that we wouldn't have to shoo her away anymore, but we were also concerned she'd gotten herself into trouble. We eventually heard that she disappeared with a Malian vampire near Bamako, becoming a blood wife that he shared with his friends. In the end, I had to admire the way she used her doe-eyed prettiness to her advantage, becoming more than a fisherman's daughter. I wish we had known she was predisposed, Ma said with a small pout, but we did not know, and so we carry on. Ma and I spoke of Amma Green less and less, then seldom. Feeding on donors frightened me after witnessing Amma's madness, but in her persistent, fearsome way, Manu convinced me that my other feeding experiences wouldn't be so bad. Various donors remarked upon the pleasure my mouth provided, but they were not hooked. Addiction was a small risk when it came to my feeding, not a guarantee. At some point, I had become an apprentice for the second time in my life, assisting Mommy as I learned to navigate being a vampire. Manu had generations of knowledge about which fauna and flora yielded which results, their effectiveness tested on her body. She liked to chew tart tree gums after meals, working them in her mouth like a grist mill. After I noticed she had most of her teeth despite her extensive tenure on Earth, each tooth white as coconut flesh, I paid more attention to how she maintained herself. The mushy face mask she made from fresh fruit despite the flies she attracted, the perfume distilled from cured mint and ginger, the oily salves that shined on her earthy skin and springy hair. Within a few months, she exhausted the exhausted hair on my own head, broken from years of stress and malnutrition, was strong enough to spread past my neck. Later, in the coming decades, my kinky bedtime twist would rest at the dip of my back. People would eventually ask me how I had such thick hair, and I would tell a half-lie, that it hadn't been cut since I was born. They didn't need to know which birth I had in mind. We lived simply and focused on what was within our control, the garden that needed weeding, the meat we haggled over at the market. Rabid customers, black, brown, and white, swore Mommy put liquid gold in her health and beauty tinctures. I, too, became known for the designs I pressed into people's skin with heated needles and ink, referencing charcoal sketches as I worked in those early days. I practiced first on goat hide and then on myself, stipling Yaba's name into my bicep and coating it with Ma's healing gel, derived from aloe vera and an assortment of herbs. Okay. So that's the end of my passage that I'm reading. I'll also be doing a giveaway of a physical book if the winner is in the US, or an ebook if you live abroad, just for simplicity's sake. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Liza. That was fascinating. And remember, folks, if you fill out that survey, that is how you get entered to win the giveaways. So you'll want to go back and find that link. It's been posted in the chat. Our third reader today is Kelli Owen.
Hello.
Kelli Owen has over a dozen books, including The Headless Boy, Teeth, and the Wilted Lilies series. Her fiction has appeared in Bram Stoker Award-nominated anthologies alongside Neil Gaiman and Stephen King. She is a member of both the HWA and the ITW and has spoken at CIA headquarters. Kelli, over to you.
Thank you. At this point in the story, Maggie is talking to herself a lot, and Jake believes it is the spirit of their unborn baby, Bobby. The story is written from alternating perspectives. Here we start with Jake and move to Maggie. Jake crossed the kitchen and opened the upper cupboard to grab a glass, only to find it filled with bowls and plates instead. He closed the cupboard and rolled his eyes at the pink Post-it note, dishes. He turned and looked around the room for the yellow one declaring glasses and made his way to it. It was the third time Maggie had moved the kitchen continents, from cupboard to cabinet and back again. And Jake wondered how many times was normal and how many times was cause for concern. Jake's stomach rumbled, reminding him why he'd come to the kitchen. Glass still in hand, he opened the fridge and scanned the contents like a teen looking to appease a late-night craving. He settled on the leftover spaghetti. There was easily enough to share. He set the Tupperware and glass on the counter and turned to find Maggie to ask if she wanted some. A scraping sound from the sunroom drew his attention, and he popped his head around the corner, expecting to find his wife in the wicker chair. The room was empty and cold. He pulled his sweatshirt sleeves back down from their shoved up to the elbow position and hugged himself. He shivered and checked the windows, noting the source of the chilly air was open more than a crack. Crossing the chilled room to correct the problem, he remembered he'd heard a noise in here and eyed the wicker chair. Old, sturdy, but lightweight. A gust of wind through the window probably moved it enough to make the scraping sound, he reasoned. He shrugged and headed back through the kitchen toward the living room, finding no Maggie at the other end of the house either. Halfway up the stairs, the sound of running water drifted toward him, and he marveled at the fact he'd lost her briefly in the house. Big enough to lose each other. Good. Give her the space she needs to heal, and enough space to fill with children when she's ready to try again. Jake smiled at the idea of small footsteps filling the hallways. He crept up the stairs and entered the master bedroom in stealth mode, not wanting to startle her if the bathroom door was open. It wasn't. He walked to the door and listened, hoping to hear music. It was silent, but for the whoosh of water. He sighed. He missed her shower routine, music blaring, her singing, but he knew a truly happy Maggie would return to it eventually. Until then, he was content to hear nothing other than the water. At least she wasn't sobbing uncontrollably on the shower floor again. When he'd found her like that, he had helped her out, dried her off, put her in her winter day pajamas, and held her for hours while she cried, napped, and woke to cry again. December had been a rough month. January wasn't much better, but now in April, they seemed to be closer to simply remembering the pain rather than being immersed in it. Maggie had graduated from good moments to good days. The week before they moved, she'd had several days in a row where she seemed almost back to normal. Grief was a horrible thing, and Jake knew that. He'd worked on healing in his own ways and felt the pain and loss and heartache differently. But as the doctor said, it didn't mean her method was wrong, just different. And Jake was a patient man. He loved Maggie, and he would be next to her as long as it took for her to notice he was still standing there. The thoughts of their loss swirled, and he felt his own emotions boiling up. He slipped into the guest bathroom in the hallway, his chest tightening as he shut the door. The tears came fast and hard, his breathing racked as he gulped for air and composure. He remembered the empty bassinet in the delivery suite and the rushed way they tried to remove the baby from the room. But Jake had seen the top of his son's head and the dark swirls of hair there, wet with birthing fluids. He had seen the tiny blue limbs hanging lifeless. And though he never saw his son's face, he signed the papers for them to harvest the viable organs. It was the right thing to do. But for several weeks, his nightmares were filled with empty babies. Their middles hollowed out, their eyes missing. Sometimes they wailed, blood leaking from the wounds. Other times they laughed and cooed, seemingly unaware they were missing vital organs. The latter were much worse, often twisting an otherwise normally safe dream into something surreal when he turned toward the happy noises and found he could see right through his son's center. He shuddered at the memory of the nightmares. The thought dried his mouth, like water pulling away from the shore before a tsunami, and his tears flowed anew. Maggie turned the water off and stood in the sudden quiet of the shower for a moment. A heavy sigh, and several blinks later, she found her inner calm, the lack of which had initially sent her to stand under the beating stream of too hot water. She shook the sadness free and reached for the towel hanging outside the stall. She froze at the sound of footsteps in the bedroom. Jake? She pulled the towel around her and pushed open the door between the bedroom and bathroom. The room was empty. Somewhere in the house, a toilet flushed, and she shrugged before returning to the bathroom to towel off and get dressed. As she pulled the brush through her hair, she heard a door close and turned back towards the bedroom. Its door was open. She set the brush down and with a raised eyebrow walked out into the hall and looked at the other 3 doors on the second floor. The guest bathroom was open. The avocado suite was open, but the striped spare bedroom was shut. Again. She was sure she'd opened it earlier. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to remember if it had been today or yesterday, but she shook her head, confident it had been earlier that same morning. She pushed the door open and looked around, half expecting to see an open window. She found nothing. Twisting her lips into an expression of disbelief, she put her hand on the door and opened it as far as it would go. She stood back and stared at it, willing it to close. The door didn't move. The room was empty, and Maggie returned to her bedroom to finish getting ready. Dressed, she made the bed and headed to turn back downstairs to find something for lunch. She grabbed the baby blanket she'd set on the dresser and pulled it toward her, knocking the Bluetooth speaker to the floor. Hearing the soft thud, Maggie turned. Recognition in the form of a thin smile spread across her face as she retrieved it and set it on the dresser. Perhaps tomorrow's shower would have some music, one of the quieter playlists. As she stepped from her bedroom, movement caught her eye, and she looked across the hall to the open door of the striped spare. A thin, dark-haired boy of 6 met her gaze from inside the room and smiled mischievously as he pushed the door shut again. And that was from The Headless Boy.
Wow, that sure took us on a trip. When you are dying to know more, you can track down Kelli at her website, kelliowen.com, and The Headless Boy. Look for the handout that has information about all of our readers and the works that they are reading from. Thank you so much, Kelli.
Thank you.
Now, onward to our fourth reader. Our fourth reader today is J.E. Hannaford. A love of nature, biology, and the ocean permeates the pages of J.E. Hannaford's fantasy stories and pours out of the characters who live in it. She is the author of the Black Hinds Wake duology, the epic fantasy Aurelian Gates trilogy, and the cozy novella Unfamiliared. J.E., over to you.
Thank you. I'm reading from Skin today, which I am giving a copy away at the end as well. I'm starting on chapter 1, and our protagonist has just been captured by a sailor. The protagonist is a Selkie. Hatred roiled inside me. I spun to face my captor. I would find a way back to the sea. He sneered, his roving eyes taking in every part of my naked form. I lifted my chin and squared my shoulders. What will you do with me? Ancient tales of forced imprisonment stirred in the depths of my memory. I expected to be taken forcefully. I braced for it, ready to fight him to my last breath. You are valuable, he said simply, so I had best ensure that this, he waved my skin, is secure from your clutches. I can't have you swimming away from me. He stepped in close, the bitter stench of human filling my nose. He reeked of what I later learned was stale beer and sweat. Salty. The wrong salt. He gripped my chin in his hand and tilted my face. I wriggled free, but my legs, unsteady with inexperience, were not as agile as I would be in the sea, and I stumbled. He laughed and swung his fist at my temple. I awoke sometime later near the old harbour, tethered by my ankle to a post. My head throbbed, exacerbated by the buzzing banquet of fly-infested food in front of me. I had very little shelter, and I was alone, shackled and captured. There was no sign of the sailor or his boat. Valuable, I muttered. So valuable you leave me tied up here with rotten food. Maybe Erin would come and untie me. I could try to escape, swim even, though how I would do that without flippers I was unsure. Home was a long way away. The human food turned my stomach, its sickly scent nauseating. I tried to ignore it. There was enough food to sustain me on the foreshore if I could get there. I pushed myself upright and dropped from the dock wall onto barnacle-encrusted rocks. My feet throbbed, the earlier cuts stinging as they dipped into salt water, and new lacerations opened with every step. Near the full extent of the rope, I could reach a number of rock pools. Last tide's water still drained away, and the seaweed was moist and tempting. I plucked a handful, stuffing the thin green sheets into my mouth. Small mollusks crawled enticingly across the pink fringes of the pools. I smashed their shells on the rocks and sucked out the cool, juicy meat. Food was food, and I was starving. A seal bobbed in the bay. He watched me for a moment, and I hoped desperately for a wind shift, for my scent to carry seaward instead of over the hill, for him to realise I was not all I appeared. He dived, and my hopes of rescue went with him. It had been a slim chance that he'd notice me. I swallowed hard as I accepted I might never see my pack again. My parents taught me that hope remains alive until all options are exhausted. So, once I had eaten, I dragged the rope back to the jagged rocks further up the shore. If I could find a sharp enough edge, I could cut myself free. I know now that my efforts would have been in vain. I could have sawed at the rope for weeks and it wouldn't have given way. Even had my pack found me, they could not have set me free. Spider silk rope, abominable treasure that it is too strong. The metal clasp around the spliced join would not break for me either, not that day or the next. Sun heated my naked skin and rain soaked me with refreshingly cool water. When the tide was in, I sat in what shallow water I could reach, my skin becoming wrinkled and soft. The brisk sea breeze chilled me faster than I dreamed possible. Without my blubber and fur, I was cold at night and the rocks were impossible to get comfortable on. What should have been a perfect resting spot to relax or doze was a sharp, skin-lacerating surface of tiny barnacles. Daily the number of cuts increased. I knew enough about this from my form to know I couldn't last long exposed to the elements naked and needed to protect myself somehow. After 2 nights, a small boat crossed from the big island to leave water and a heap of foul human food on the rocks for me. The woman who brought it curled her lip in disdain at my naked form. Stupid creature. As stupid as the old tales, letting yourself be trapped by that idiot of a human. You deserve your fate. You and all your filthy kind. She spat at me and walked away. The next time she came, I asked for clothes and wondered aloud how long I would be here. She looked me up and down. My skin was red in patches, cut and damaged from the sun and rocks. I knew I made a sorry sight. He'll be back when he's back. He won't pay me so much for a ruined prize. I will get you clothes. When she returned, she dumped a pile of old clothes on the dock. They stank. I thanked her with as much grace as I could muster. As soon as she'd gone, I threw the clothes in the sea and let the scent of home wash away the stench of the land, leaving the food, as ever, for the flies and gulls. Once the clothes were cleaner, and I could stomach their smell, I inspected what the woman had brought. Because of the tether, I would have to unpick the stitching on one leg and sew them back together with a fishbone, much like I'd stitch kelp leaves to make a bed. A rotting fish, dumped by the gulls at the strand line, had a few large bones left, so I fashioned a hook for the thread and donned the top. Its itchy fabric sat uncomfortably against my skin. How could humans wear this stuff? I set to work unpicking the knot on the trouser leg and carefully pulled the threads from the outer seam. It took most of the day to restitch the trousers, the tiny stitches fiddlier than anything I had ever sewn before. Once the tethered leg was sewn on, I slipped my other leg in too. I looked more human now. The clothes did a lot of the work for me, although I would still need to use a Selkie glamour to complete the transformation. I tried to remember the shape of the old woman's teeth and carefully built an image of them in my mind. I dropped an illusion of them over my own sharp pegs. If I was going to pass as human, I was also going to have to eat their disgusting food, even if only to maintain my strength while amongst them. I stared at the pile and chose the least offensive item. It took a few attempts to chew it without gagging, but I persevered. As I nibbled, the seeds of a plan began to form in my mind. I had seen some flint I could use to create a sharp blade, and could tuck the needle amongst my clothes as a small protection against unwanted advances. I would be taken from here, of that I had no doubt, but I would not go helpless into their world. There may only be a very small window to work in, a single chance for freedom, and I would be ready to grab it whenever and however it came my way. And that is the end of the bit that I was going to read. So that is The Skin, and it's book 1 of a duology, which is complete. The Pact is the second one behind me. I'm giving away a copy of The Skin to anywhere in the world, but it might come via Ingram, and 2 audiobooks. And there's 2 stories on my newsletter, one of which links to this as well.
Wow, thank you very much for that evocative reading. That was some good stuff. Very curious about what happens next. And now I know if I fill out that form, maybe I could win a copy of The Skin. Good stuff. All right. Our fifth reader today is Jessica Turnbull. Oh, sorry. Fifth reader. Our fifth reader today is V Melcer. V Melcer is the author of science fiction novels Refractions and Inversions. Her short fiction has appeared in Clark's World, Giganotosaurus, and others. Born in Poland, MV has lived in the USA, the Netherlands, and Belgium before settling in the UK. When not writing, she is pursuing a degree in astronomy. Take it away.
Hello, I'll be reading, as it says, from Inversion, which is part of a duology of Refractions and Inversions. It is a duology, but these are two standalone books, so they can be, as it says, read separately. Inversions now is coming out on the 14th of August. So, and I think I'm the only science fiction reader here, so let me start with A Strange World. Well, not really strange, right? Because it's near future, so partly set in a world just after barely recovered from climate change, but it's still ongoing, and more about it maybe later. Elizabeth Lake, proceed to the interview room. She's been waiting for the call, and still the soft, inflectionless voice makes her shiver. She gets up, resisting the urge to wipe her palms on her trousers. She's alone in a wide hallway, but those tiny dimples in the ceiling may be cameras. Every move she makes now might matter, every gesture. She draws a sharp breath and moves to the frosted glass door. This is it. The future will be decided in the next 10 minutes. Everything she's worked for concentrated into these final moments with the selection committee. The door slides open before her, letting out the previous candidate. Dark hair and golden brown skin, his face only vaguely familiar. He avoids her glance, his lips pursed into a tight line. Not a good sign. Liz looks away, fighting to keep her focus. He might have failed, but that means nothing for her chances. She keeps her head high as she enters the Hyde Healing's room, its walls pearly white except for the double arrowhead logo of the Aspire Academy opposite the door. A C-shaped table of milky glass faces a lonely chair at its focus. 5 people watch her from behind a table. The heads of the engineering and astronomy departments sit together at one end, Dianna and her thesis supervisor on the other. Somewhat in the middle are Dean Solik and a thin-paced man she doesn't recognize. His name doesn't matter, though. One look at his clothes tells her all she needs to know. A long, tailored jacket of steel blue silk worn over matching shirt and trousers. Soft, embroidered shoes not meant for treading on stone ground. This man is from the Yunjur, descended from orbit to interview the candidates, desperate to join him there. It takes all her self-control to keep her knees from folding under her as Liz crosses the short distance and lowers herself into the chair. The Yunjur man smiles thinly, his gaze apprising, probing, searching for folds under her skin. A drop of sweat slides down her back. Everything she's worked for will depend on his word, her entire future. Dean Solik taps the projection glass surface of the table. Elizabeth Lake, a double doctorate from heliophysics and magnetospherics. Interesting combination. Looking at your grades, though, maybe you should have gone for depth instead of breadth. Liz winces. The double speciality was supposed to be an advantage, not a liability. Miss Lake's grades are above satisfactory, Dr. Anders says. We don't care for satisfactory, Solik says, and the Yunjur man next to him nods. We're only interested in exceptional. Liz's mind is reeling. She's in the top 5% of the graduates in both profiles. Not enough. The entire point of the academy is to find the best of the best, those good enough for the elite jobs in orbit. Top 1% at most. She was never going to make that. She's smart, but not brilliant, and at 32, her mind is no longer as nimble as it used to be. Her gamble was choosing a double speciality. Has she made a wrong bet? The thin-faced man from the Yunjur stretches his lips in another half-smile. We are indeed only interested in exceptional. Are you exceptional, Miss Lake? Liz bites her lip. She's not done yet. It's been a gamble, and she'd be damned if she pulled it before playing her hand. Yes, I very much am. Not because I'm another 1%er. The Academy churns those every year. But none of them can help you the way I can. You need me. The Yunju man leans back, one brow inching its way up his forehead. But when he speaks, he doesn't like surprised. Is that so? Liz pulls a slow breath, her voice settling into something close to confidence. My previous career has told me that there are few problems a single speciality can solve. The solutions often hide in the interstices. That's why I chose my fields. Heliophysics, to forecast the types and severity of solar events. Magnetospherics, to study the interactions between the storms and the radiation belts. We're at solar maximum. Sooner or later, it's bound to destabilize the belts. That's why you invited me to this interview. Because you need me. She holds the man's gaze. He tilts his head. His smile falters, then reappears like a snake slithering over his face. You make some good points, Miss Lake. But tell me, which is it for you? Are you hoping to build a future in Yunju? Or are you simply trying to get away from your father? A gasp escapes her lips before she can stop it. He knows. They know. Of course they do. The Yunju security was bound to find out. They've seen through her even after she's gone through the troubled legal nightmare of changing her name twice, just so she could disappear. All the others are studying her now, examining her like she's the last tiger left in a closing zoo. Only Dinsolik shows no surprise. How long has he known? Is he the one who warned the Yunju, or... It doesn't matter. They all know now. She tried to run, but she's back in that same old trap. It's a small kindness that neither Dinsolik or the Yunju man speak her old name. At least she won't have to face the moment when the others' curiosity turns to disgust and hate. Dr. Ender has been kind to her. Will her teacher regret that now, when she finds out whom she helped? Liz's fingers curl into fists. Get. She's worked too hard. This will not end in yet another defeat because of him. She lifts her head and stares at the Yunju man, who still hasn't given her the courtesy of a name. I'm not my father. If you know anything about me, then you know that I hate everything he stands for. That's why I'm here, why I've changed my name, why I want a new start as my own person. Yes, I'm running away, and so is everybody else. This planet is dying, the Yunju is a dream we all chase. I just have one extra reason not to want to leave. You can say it makes me even more motivated. Your other candidates may consider a return. I don't have that option. The man nods. His gaze loses focus, his lips twitching as he vocalizes a conversation. He's talking to someone he can see on his lenses. Liz holds her breath, her lungs bursting with air and anxiety. The man nods imperceptibly. Then his gaze refocuses. Congratulations, Miss Lake. We've approved a temporary apprenticeship. You'll have 6 months to prove that you really are as indispensable as you claim. Thank you, and I'll be giving copies of both novels to one reader. Thank you.
Bravo, Liz, and bravo, LV. Thank you for reading that. It was intriguing, lots of tension building up there, and I would certainly be interested to know what's going to happen next. You can follow MV Melcer, and maybe you can win a copy of Inversions if you fill out that survey that you will find in the chat. Onward to our final reader of the day. Our final reader today is Jessica Turnbull. Jessica Turnbull is an author who mainly writes young adult fantasy, horror, and sci-fi. Books got her through her darkest years as a teenager, and she hopes that one day hers will inspire young people to keep going. She lives in the UK with her cat, Mishka. Jessica, over to you.
Today I'll be reading a passage from Mute. The main character, Audra, suffers from selective mutism, so she doesn't speak a word throughout the book. Instead, she'll communicate through text via her phone. But I thought I'd read you a passage where they first discovered a monster that's going to be hunting them down. Moss looks concerned and cracks a door open. Audra stands up to peer through. On the other side, 2 bookshelves have been tipped over, their contents in heaps on the floor. Moss bends down to grab a book, but suddenly looks up and screams. Before anyone can ask what's wrong, she slams the door shut on a hand. Moss, what the hell? Kai screams. You just broken someone's hand. Moss is now white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. That's not. The door swings open and the hand retracts, but there's no one on the other side. Audra's throat burns as she looks outside, her heart beating frantically. Someone is out there. Why are we all just staring? Reed grumbles. Moss screams as Reed approaches the door. A hand extends from behind the door and pulls him out. Carly screeches and rushes after him, her screams getting higher pitched as she sees what's dragging him. A humanoid creature on all fours with sickly grey skin has Reed in its hands. Its lips have been chewed off, whether by itself or something else. Instead of fingernails, there are pieces of dead wood. It looks at them all with eyes so bloodshot they're practically pink. Get it off me, Reed screeches, struggling in its grip. The creature bares its teeth, rows upon rows of sharp canines lining its mouth. It unhinges its jaw to strike when Carly smashes it on the back of the head for the shelf. The creature lets out a strangely human scream and loosens its grip on Reed, allowing him to scramble back to the group. He grabs Carly's hand to pull her behind him as the creature recovers and starts to advance. There's a sound of snapping wood as the creature creeps forward. Thick branches spread from its back, the colour of dried mahogany. The branches act as extra limbs, brushing over the fallen books as if trying to steady them. One branch reaches for Reed, but he smacks it away. The creature releases another ear-splitting screech, grey spittle flying from its exposed gums. Some of the group scream along with it and drag Reed and Carly back in to slam the door shut. Audra throws her body at the door alongside Ovi. There's a gentle push from the other side as the creature tests its strength. She wants to scream, but no noise comes out. After a few test prods, the creature realizes that they can't hold it back long and starts pressing its body against the wood. Ovi and Audra are pushed forward against their will as a branch creeps through the open crack. Get it, Ovi shouts, stumbling forward for a second before returning to the door. Audra grabs the branch and yanks hard. She didn't need much strength. The wood crumbles to dust between her fingers. There's another screech and then the sound of books being thrown out of the way. The weight on the door suddenly disappears, making the two of them fall back with a thump. Is it gone? Henrietta asks, looking pale. Don't trust it. It could come back at any moment, Kai squeaks from behind George's shoulder. If it's gone, we have to run, Moss pants. We can't stay in here. I'm sorry. You want us to run outside with that thing? If it comes back, it'll easily break through that door. Then more of us need to hold it back, that's all. Han speaks for the first time since the creature showed up. Guys, I found it. The creature's face is pressed up against the glass window behind them. Thick drool lines the corner of its mouth and a dry pink tongue darts between its teeth. Go, Moss screams, running for the door. The sound of exploding gas fills Audra's eardrums as the creature bursts through. It seems unbothered by the shards digging into its skin. The closest person, Aaron, dodges out of the way of its hands and pushes Audra out for the door. The creature stares at her, a low growl emanating from its throat. It slowly lifts its chin up, revealing that its neck is completely open. She can see the muscles and wet vocal cords move with each breath it takes. What's going on here? On the other side of the glass is a man Audra doesn't recognize. Even without her voice, she's too late to warn him. The creature screams and jumps back through the window, tackling the poor man to the ground. There's a wet, ripping sound as the man screams and a bloodied hand reaches for the window frame but is yanked back down. She's torn away from the grisly scene by a hand grabbing her shoulder. Audra, come on! Ovi pushes her forward and shuts the door behind them. His grip on her arm doesn't loosen until they're outside, shivering in the cold air. And if you want to hear more from that book, then I'm giving away 2 free copies if you sign up to my newsletter today. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, Jessica, way to leave us hanging. Dragged out the door. Arr! So visceral, so nasty. Nice and chilly on a day like today. So, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for today's Quick Reads. Thank you so much.